To prevent repetition, I shall here also notice that our author affirms on page 174, quote, "As to the putting a bar to violent intrusions, the General Assembly 1736 revived that old act which declares against settling church officers contrary to the will of the congregation," unquote. But what bar have they put upon violent intrusions when, with the same breath, they appoint the Presbytery of Stirling to proceed to the settlement of the present to the parish of Denny, and to be at pains to bring the people of that parish to submit to the decisions of the church? Every unprejudiced person judge if such inconsistent proceedings in a judicatory that bears the character of a court of Christ have not a direct tendency to expose and cast loose our principles instead of asserting and maintaining them. Our author, page 122, alleges that, quote, the not censuring Professor Simpson and Professor Campbell, according to the demerit of their office, can be no such step of defection as is ground of separation. For, says he, sometimes the Church of Christ hath judged it convenient to pass the erroneous without inflicting any ecclesiastical censure for their offense, unquote. And the proof he brings of this is taken from Acts 15, where he observes that the first New Testament General Assembly or Council, though they condemn the corrupt and erroneous doctrine that was vented, quote, yet, says he, we read not a word of any censure inflicted upon the preachers or teachers thereof, unquote. But our author would remember that the secession from the present judicatories is not stated simply upon their not inflicting due censure upon the erroneous, but especially upon their dismissing them from their bar without asserting the truth in opposition to their errors, and without an express condemnation of these errors. And in this respect their conduct was the reverse of what was the practice of that famous synod, who particularly and expressly condemned the corrupt doctrines that had then sprung up in the church. When our author affirms that there was not a word of any censure inflicted upon the foresaid corrupt preachers and teachers, he unwarily pleads the cause of the independents, who affirm the very same thing. But in opposition to them, our Presbyterian divines do affirm that this synod at Jerusalem did, quote, put forth a critic or censuring power, stigmatizing the false teachers with the infamous brand of troubling the church with words and subverting of souls, Acts 15:24, unquote. This was indeed a very high censure, as the author may find from the London ministers in their Just Div Reg Ecclesiastes. It's Just J-U-S Div D-I-V Reg R-E-G Ecclesiastes, just abbreviated E-C-C-L, page 226. And there he will find likewise a more solid reason than that imaginary one which he alleges and pretends to answer why that synod did not proceed against the false teachers by the censure of excommunication. And it is plain that the point in question before the said synod was a point that had not been determined before that time in the Christian church, and therefore it was neither seasonable nor needful to proceed to a higher censure than that which was already passed against these false teachers, until it should appear that they persisted in their course and were obstinate in the same, notwithstanding of the foresaid synodical determination. But though the doctrinal errors which have been brought to the bar of our judicatories are such as stand condemned by our confession of faith and the confessions of other Reformed churches, yet if the judicatories of this national church had condemned the said errors and declared the teachers of them to be such as have troubled us with words and subverters of souls, though they had not proceeded to any higher censure, I humbly judge the argument had not been quite so strong as now it is for stating a secession from them upon the head of doctrine. I have now traced our author in the several exceptions against our argument for secession, as it is stated upon the conduct of the judicatories on the affair of doctrine, and it is plain from what is observed that the tendency of his reasoning is to vindicate the conduct or extenuate the sin of the present judicatories in the whole of their management about this weighty and important matter. As for the treatment, he gives some expressions contained in the paper given in my reverend brother, Mr. Mayor, to the Presbytery, together with his retreat to the Assembly 1638, and his other common topics, which I know not how oft are repeated in his essay. I shall consider them in their proper place. Only, before I pass this head, I cannot but notice what a small account this author makes of his grievous backslidings of the Church of Scotland from her Reformation purity. Quote, for, says he, on page 1:22. Most of the things laid to the charge of the Church of Scotland at this day are only omissions, unquote. And page 174, when he mentions it as one of the principal grounds of secession that no warning hath been emitted against errors and blasphemous heresies vented among us, quote, for my part, says he, I should be glad to see such a warning, but the neglect of this is only an omission, unquote. It seems that such omissions make but a little impression upon his own mind, and he endeavors what he can that his reader may make as little account of them as he does. Though our secession is stated upon commissions as well as omissions, yet I wish our author would consider that omissions are so heinous and grievous in the sight of God, that when sentence is passed against men at the great day, omissions are only mentioned. Matthew 25 verses 41 and 42, etc. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me no meat, etc. Omissions may even turn the purest churches into synagogues of Satan. If the erroneous are not censured, and if error is not condemned, a society professing to be a religious society may soon become a herd of blasphemous Arians and Socinians, and of wicked Arminians, and of the like gross subverters of the truth and of the souls of men. And therefore, whatever the author of the essay or others may think of the conduct of the present judicatories in not condemning plainly the errors of the day, and in refusing to assert the truth in opposition unto them, yet from what is observed it may be evident that their omissions in this matter are such, whereby this national church, as she is represented in her present judicatories, has forfeit a claim to the scripture character of the church of the living God. In regard, she does not uphold, support, maintain, and confess the truth in opposition to the errors of the day. Yea, they are such, whereby she does not answer one of the special ends of the Lord's rearing up and erecting a visible church upon the earth, namely, that there may be an open and public profession and confession of the truth to the honor and praise and the glory of our great Emmanuel, who builds the temple of the Lord and bears all the glory. Again, these omissions are such, whereby our confession of faith is no more a fixed standard and test of orthodoxy and soundness in the faith amongst the present judicatories, or these that are in conjunction with them, and likewise the said omissions are such, whereby she has practically let go, in her foresaid capacity, these truths that were once received and confessed amongst us, while our confession of faith and the several articles thereof were maintained and held in their genuine sense and meaning. In fine, these omissions mentioned are such, whereby one principal bond of our ecclesiastical unity is dissolved and broke by the present judicatories. From all which it appears that our secession from them, as it is stated upon the head of doctrine, is both just and warrantable. I shall conclude this head with an instance or two besides these I have already named, to show how averse the primitive Christians were from the very appearance of any religious communion with the erroneous. Mr. Cloud reports that, as for those who taught false doctrine, the primitive church never had any union with them. Quote, and, says he, not only the ancients had no communion with them, but to show how necessary and indispensable they judged a separation from them to be, they went so far as to refuse communion with the orthodox themselves, when either by surprise or weakness or some other interest they had received heretics into their communion, although as to themselves they had kept their faith in its purity. Unquote. He gives two examples of this strictness in the primitive church. The one is of Gregory, the father of Gregory Nazianzen, who, being deceived by a salacious writing, gave the communion to Arians, whereupon, quote, all the monks of his diocese, with the greatest part of his church, separated themselves from him, although they well knew that he had not changed his mind nor embraced heresy. Unquote. The other instance he gives is that of the Orthodox of the Church of Rome, who refused to hold communion with Felix their bishop, quote, because he had held communion with the Arians, although he entirely held the creed of the Council of Nicaea. Unquote. Cloud mentions these instances only to show how far their aversion went, which they had from holding communion with the Arians, though he does not absolutely approve of the above carriage. Neither can I justify the carriage of Gregory's church, who separated from him when he was imposed upon by a salacious writing. But their carriage would have been more justifiable if they had been in the same circumstances with us, who have to deal with judicatories, who, without any imposition upon them, have held an Arian in ministerial and Christian communion with them, and have obstinately refused to give the church faithful warning against his errors. The same author likewise reports that Faustinus, Faustinus, in his treatise against the Arians, says, quote, "If any one did not believe that the society of the Arians could be rendered culpable under a pretense that he had the testimony of his own conscience, which did not accuse him of having violated or renounced the faith, there it belonged to such an one to take heed and to examine himself. But as for me, the cause of God being concerned, I judge myself bound to be more precautioned and to have a greater fear than those persons have." Unquote. I shall only add what Dupin reports of Hilary, Bishop of Poictiers, who, having come to the synod that met at Seleucia Anon 359, did, at his first entrance into the synod, make confession of his faith according to the decisions of the Council of Nicaea, upon which he took his seat in the synod. But when he observed that many of the bishops were Arians, he departed and would not be any more present with them. It is to be observed that the synod admitted of the above confession of his faith, yet he would have no church communion where Arians were sitting as members. Many other instances to this purpose might be given of the primitive Christians refusing religious or church communion with the adversaries of truth, even where no such thing was expressly required as an approbation of the principles of the erroneous.